elderly man, frail and heartbroken, climbs into the back seat of his son's car, clutching a small suitcase. His heart is heavy, believing this ride will end at a nursing home, a place he's begged to go because he no longer feels wanted in his own family. The silence in the car is deafening. Every mile they travel seems to confirm his worst fears. He is a burden, an afterthought. But what he doesn't know is that this journey is about to take a turn so unexpected, so life-changing, it will leave him speechless. Before we dive into this powerful and emotional story of love, sacrifice, and rediscovery, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this one, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay connected with more inspiring tales. The sun filtered dimly through the curtains of a modest room, casting soft shadows on the walls. Mateo Ramirez, a 74-year-old widower, sat in his well-worn chair by the window, gazing at the city streets below. His hands rested lightly on his knees, fingers unconsciously tapping to the rhythm of a far-off memory he couldn't quite place. This room, though tidy and adequate, never felt like his own. It was part of his son Leo's home in bustling Austin, Texas, a place vibrant with energy but silent in the corners. Mateo occupied. Mateo had always prided himself on being independent, capable of handling whatever life threw at him. He wasn't one to complain or demand much. Lately, however, he found his thoughts returning to the same troubling conclusion. He was becoming a burden. This was a fear that gnawed at him more with each passing day. The room he now lived in had once belonged to his grandson. Mateo's muted existence had replaced the laughter and warmth of a child's presence, and he hated that. Bookmark back. From the doorway, he could hear the muffled voices of Leo and his wife Clara discussing work and schedules. Their lives moved forward relentlessly, while Mateo felt like a rock tethered to a shore being slowly eroded by the tide. His days were simple but monotonous. Meals were often dropped off by Elena, the kind but blunt neighbor who sometimes helped out when Clara and Leo were busy. Mateo appreciated her efforts, but her words often stung. "They don't want you here, Mateo," she had said one afternoon while setting down a soup plate. "It's not personal. It's just how it goes for people like us when we get old." The truth, as Mateo saw it, was worse than her bluntness. Leo and Clara weren't cruel or neglectful. They didn't know what to do with him anymore. Mateo's heart ached whenever Leo rushed out of the house with a quick goodbye, or when Clara hurried through a polite conversation before retreating to her office. Even their young son seemed to avoid lingering in Mateo's now occupied room. Mateo's only solace was his memories, but even they were starting to feel like ghosts haunting his thoughts. From time to time, Mateo would let his gaze linger on the faded photograph he kept by his bedside. It was of his late wife, Camila, her warm smile frozen in time. She was everything to him: anchor, his partner, and his home. Together they had raised Leo in a small but lively house in San Antonio. That home had been a testament to their love and resilience, filled with laughter, hard work, and quiet evenings under the stars. Camila's absence was a wound that never healed. She had passed away several years ago, leaving Mateo adrift. But the real blow came after that, a fire that destroyed their beloved home and everything in it. The fire had started on a quiet evening. A sudden power outage had left Mateo lighting a candle for light. Exhausted after a day working the fields, he had fallen asleep, and when he woke, the house was engulfed in smoke. Neighbors broke down the door to save him, but the home and all its memories were gone. Mateo had been hospitalized for weeks, barely recovering from the ordeal. After the fire, Leo brought him to Austin to recover. Mateo tried to adjust to the change, but the shift was too much. He felt like a stranger in a foreign place. While the city buzzed with life, Mateo's heart remained in San Antonio with Camila, the home they built, and the garden he once tended. The pain of displacement deepened during moments of solitude. Mateo often replayed conversations with Camila or imagined what life might have been like if she were still there. Would she have been able to bridge the growing distance between him and Leo? Would she have reminded him that he was still valued, still needed? But as things stood, Mateo's hope dwindled. He avoided speaking up, reluctant to burden Leo and Clara further. On his birthday, he sat alone with a small slice of cake Elena had left for him. Leo and Clara had greeted him in the morning with a cheerful happy birthday, but their smiles quickly faded as they hurried off to work. The silence of the house that day weighed heavily on Mateo. It was in that silence that Mateo made his decision. He would ask Leo to take him to a nursing home. He didn't see it as abandonment, but as relief for everyone. Mateo believed his presence was a constant reminder of a past his family no longer had time for. Moving to a nursing facility would allow them to live freely, without guilt or obligation. One evening after dinner, Mateo confronted Leo in the kitchen. "Mijo," he began, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I need you to take me to a place where I can live, somewhere like a nursing home." Leo froze his fork halfway to his mouth. "Papa, no," he said, shaking his head. "You don't need that. We'll talk about this later, okay?" Mateo's frustration boiled over. "If you don't do it, I'll find a way myself," he snapped, his voice uncharacteristically sharp. Leo simply sighed and patted Mateo's shoulder. "It's been a long day, Papa. Let's not do this right now." As Leo walked away, Mateo felt the sting of invisibility again. Each night after that conversation, Mateo sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the photograph of Camila. "I'm sorry, mi amor," he whispered to her image, his voice trembling. "I've become a burden. I didn't want it to be like this." The guilt and loneliness pressed on him, making the days bleed into one another. And then, one Saturday morning, something changed. Mateo sat on the edge of his bed, his fingers lightly brushing the photograph of Camila. Her radiant smile and the sparkle in her eyes were captured in that image, a reminder of the warmth and love that had once filled his life. Though the photograph had grown weathered with time, it was still the anchor that tethered Mateo to the man he once was. Back then, life had been simple yet beautiful in their small wooden home in San Antonio. He could still recall the smell of freshly brewed coffee that wafted through the kitchen every morning as Camila hummed her favorite song. The sound of Alejandro, or Leo, as they affectionately called their adopted son, laughing as he chased the family's scruffy dog around the yard, filled the air with joy. Mateo never considered Leo anything other than his flesh and blood. The boy had come into Mateo's life when he married Camila. But from the first time Leo called him Papa, Mateo's heart had been won. He had promised himself he would give the boy the world, and did his best to keep that promise. Their house wasn't much in size, but overflowed with life and love. Every creaky floorboard and every faded wall told a story. The kitchen was the heart of their home, where Camila would cook fragrant meals that even the neighbors would sometimes wander over for a taste. Mateo would join her, chopping vegetables or sneaking bites while she scolded him playfully. The garden was Mateo's sanctuary. Rows of vibrant vegetables and fragrant flowers stretched across the backyard, their colors dancing under the Texan sun. It was his pride and joy, where he and Camila spent countless afternoons planting, weeding, and harvesting. Sometimes Leo would join them, his tiny hands eagerly digging into the soil as Mateo taught him how to nurture life from the earth. And then there was Estrella, Mateo's loyal horse. The old stallion had been with him for years, accompanying him through long work days and quiet rides through the countryside. Estrella wasn't just an animal to Mateo. He was a companion, a constant presence in a world that sometimes felt uncertain. But life, as Mateo had learned, could change in an instant. It was a night like any other, when the fire took everything. Mateo could still feel the heat on his skin, the thick, suffocating smoke that filled his lungs, and the shouts of his neighbors as they pulled him to safety. When he finally regained consciousness in the hospital weeks later, his body was battered but alive. Yet something inside him had been irreparably broken. The fire hadn't just consumed the walls and roof of his house, it had devoured his memories, roots, and sense of self. The life he had built with Camila, the laughter they had shared, and the dreams they had nurtured were all reduced to ash. Camila's belongings, her cherished keepsakes, and the little notes she had written to Mateo over the years were gone. The garden, once full of life, was now a blackened wasteland. Estrella had vanished in the chaos, and Mateo assumed he was gone forever. When Leo had come to bring him to Austin, Mateo hadn't argued. He was too tired, too broken to resist. But deep down, he knew that leaving San Antonio wasn't just about moving to a new city. It was about leaving behind the life he had loved, the life that felt like his own. Life in Austin was starkly different. Towering skyscrapers and crowded streets replaced the sprawling fields and open skies of San Antonio. The air felt heavier, the days shorter, and Mateo's connection to the world around him seemed to grow fainter. Though Leo and Clara tried to make him comfortable, Mateo couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. While clean and practical, his room lacked the warmth of his old home. The walls were bare, the furniture impersonal. Even the food tasted different, less hearty, less familiar. At night, when the city light seeped through his curtains, Mateo would close his eyes and try to conjure up the sound of Camila's laughter. But the memories were like smoke, fleeting and impossible to grasp. What hurt the most was the growing distance between him and Leo. Mateo had always imagined that his golden years would be spent surrounded by family, filled with laughter and shared meals. But the reality was starkly different. Leo had grown up, become a man with a demanding career and a family of his own. Mateo was proud of him, of course, but he couldn't help but feel like they were living in separate worlds. Clara, though kind, always seemed preoccupied. Their young son, Mateo's grandson, rarely spent time with him. It wasn't out of malice, but simply because the boy didn't know him well enough to be comfortable around him. Mateo longed for connection, for a sense of purpose. He wanted to tell Leo about the garden, about the way Camila's eyes sparkled when she talked about their plans for the future. He wanted to share stories of their life together, to pass down the lessons he had learned. But every time he tried, the words got stuck in his throat. The loneliness was a weight that grew heavier with each passing day. Mateo would sit by the window for hours, watching the world move on without him. Even the occasional visit from Elena, the neighbor who brought him meals and helped around the house, did little to lift his spirits. Her well-meaning but blunt comments often left him feeling worse. "Why don't you tell them to send you somewhere better?" Elena had asked one afternoon, shaking her head. "A place where you can be with people your own age." "They don't want you here, Mateo." "It's not their fault, it's just how it is." Her words echoed in Mateo's mind long after she left. He knew she wasn't entirely wrong. He could feel it in the rushed goodbyes, in the way Leo's shoulders seemed to tense whenever Mateo brought up his struggles. That night, as Mateo sat in his room, he made up his mind. He would ask Leo to take him to a nursing home. It wasn't an easy decision, but Mateo believed it was the right one. He couldn't bear to be the shadow hanging over his son's life any longer. Maybe in a nursing facility, he could find some semblance of peace. At the very least, he wouldn't feel like an unwanted guest in his own family's home. He stared at Camila's photograph one last time before setting it down on the bedside table. "I hope you understand, mi amor," he whispered. "I just want them to be happy." With that, Mateo closed his eyes and prepared himself for the difficult conversation he would have with Leo the next day. Morning light streamed through Mateo's window, soft and golden, but it did little to warm the cold resolve in his heart. Today was the day. He had made up his mind the night before, and nothing would change it now. For weeks, he had felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him, but today it felt oddly freeing. He dressed carefully, buttoning his shirt and smoothing it down as if preparing for an important meeting. Every motion was deliberate, his hands trembling slightly as he fastened his belt. The photograph of Camila caught his eye on the nightstand, her smile a silent encouragement. In the kitchen, Leo sat hunched over a laptop at the table, his coffee steaming beside him. Clara was bustling around, gathering papers and a briefcase, her heels clicking briskly on the tile floor. Their son darted through the room, giggling as he chased a toy car. It was a scene of movement, energy, and purpose, a life Mateo felt completely detached from. He cleared his throat, and all motion stopped for a brief moment. Clara offered him a quick smile before rushing out the door. The boy followed, leaving just Mateo and Leo in the kitchen. "Papa," Leo said, looking up from his laptop. "Did you sleep well?" Mateo nodded but didn't answer right away. He took a seat across from his son, his back straight and hands folded neatly on the table. "I need to talk to you," he said finally, his voice steady but quiet. Leo closed the laptop, sensing the weight of the conversation before Mateo even spoke another word. "I need you to take me to a nursing home," Mateo said, his eyes fixed firmly on his folded hands. "It's time." The words hung heavy in the air, like the slow toll of a church bell. Leo blinked, stunned. What are you talking about, Papa? You don't need to go to a nursing home. You're fine here. I'm not fine, mijo, Mateo replied, his tone firmer now. I don't belong here. I don't want to be a burden to you or Clara anymore. You've already done so much for me. Leo sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Papa, you're not a burden. Why would you think that? Mateo gave a sad smile, his eyes meeting Leo's for the first time. Because I can see it. You don't have to say it, I know. I know how busy you are, how hard you work to take care of your family. I've lived long enough to understand when I'm in the way. Leo opened his mouth to argue, but Mateo raised a hand to stop him. This isn't about you or Clara or even me, Mateo continued. It's about doing what's best for everyone. At a nursing home, I can have company, people my own age. You won't have to worry about me anymore. Leo shook his head, frustration flickering across his face. Papa, no, that's not happening. We'll talk about this later, okay? Right now I have too much on my plate. Mateo's chest tightened, his frustration bubbling to the surface. If you won't take me, I'll find a way myself, he said, his voice sharper than he intended. Leo stood abruptly, grabbing his coffee and heading toward the door. Let's not do this now, Papa. Please. The sound of the door closing behind him felt like the echo of defeat. Mateo sat alone at the table, his hands trembling slightly. He had tried, but his words had fallen into the void, unheard. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Mateo and Leo remained unspoken but palpable. Mateo no longer brought up the subject, but his resolve didn't waver. Each night, as he sat in his room staring at Camila's photograph, he whispered apologies to her. I'm sorry, mi amor, he would say. I've become someone I never wanted to be, an old man clinging to the edges of his family's life. I just want them to be happy. That's all. He began retreating further into himself, spending even more time alone. Meals were eaten in silence, his interactions with Leo and Clara reduced to polite exchanges. Even Elena, the neighbor who sometimes dropped by with food, noticed the change in him. You're too quiet these days, she remarked one afternoon as she set a bowl of stew on the table. I don't like it. You're giving up. Mateo simply shrugged, offering her a faint smile. Maybe it's just time for me to let go of things. Elena scowled, crossing her arms. Don't talk like that. You're still here, Mateo. You've got a family, whether you see it or not. Maybe they don't say it enough, but they love you. Her words were kind, but they felt like hollow echoes against the walls of his heart. The final blow came on Mateo's birthday. That morning, Leo and Clara greeted him with smiles and warm hugs. Happy birthday, Papa, Clara said cheerfully, handing him a card. Thank you, Mateo replied softly, his heart aching at the warmth in their voices. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe that the day might be special. But as quickly as the moment came, it passed. Clara grabbed her bag and hurried out the door, apologizing as she went. Sorry, Mateo. I have meetings all day. I'll see you tonight. Leo kissed Mateo on the cheek before rushing after her. We'll celebrate properly later. Okay, Papa? Love you. Mateo stood in the doorway watching them leave. The house grew silent again, save for the ticking of the clock on the wall. By the time Elena arrived with a small slice of cake, Mateo's heart felt heavy with disappointment. She set the cake down in front of him with a knowing look. Another birthday alone, huh? She said, shaking her head. That's how it goes, I guess. Happy birthday, old man. Mateo forced a smile, but inside the loneliness was suffocating. That night he sat by the window, staring at the flickering lights of the city. The slice of cake remained untouched on the table. Mateo's thoughts turned once again to Camila, her photograph a silent companion. I thought I could handle this, he whispered to her. But I can't. I need to do something, mi amor. For them. For me. The next morning when Leo came into his room with a small bag and a quiet smile, Mateo was surprised. Pack your things, Papa, Leo said. We're going on a trip. Mateo froze, the words catching him off guard. A trip? His heart began to race. Where are we going? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. You'll see, Leo replied with a cryptic smile. For the first time in weeks, Mateo felt a spark of curiosity. But beneath that curiosity was a deeper fear. Was this the beginning of goodbye? The morning air was crisp as Mateo followed Leo to the car. Clara stood on the porch, waving as she called out, Have a good trip. There was a small bag in Mateo's hand, packed with a few changes of clothes, a photograph of Camila, and a notebook he often used to jot down thoughts he couldn't say aloud. His heart felt heavy as he slid into the back seat. The silence inside the car was deafening, save for the soft hum of the engine as Leo started it. Clara's wave was the last familiar thing Mateo saw before the house disappeared behind them. He glanced at Leo in the rearview mirror, trying to read his expression. Leo's face was calm and his hand was focused on the road, but there was something unreadable in his eyes that made Mateo's chest tighten. Mateo clutched the small bag on his lap as if it were a lifeline. "Where are we going?" Mateo asked, his voice thin and uncertain. "You'll see," Leo replied with a faint smile. The car wound through the busy streets of Austin, but soon the towering buildings gave way to open roads. Mateo watched as the city faded into rolling hills and patches of farmland. The sight stirred a mix of emotions within him. The weathered fences lining the roads reminded him of long drives with Camila, their laughter filling the car as they pointed out wildflowers and shared stories of their youth. The clusters of bluebonnets swaying in the breeze brought back memories of his garden, where he and Camila had spent countless afternoons nurturing the earth together. But as the familiar sights of the countryside unfolded before him, Mateo couldn't shake the unease that gnawed at his mind. "Is this far from the city?" Mateo asked, his voice hesitant. "Not too far," Leo said simply, keeping his eyes on the road. Mateo pressed his lips together, unsure whether to feel relieved or more anxious. Far from the city, he thought, could mean isolation. A nursing home tucked away in some quiet, forgotten corner. He stared out the window, trying to distract himself with the passing scenery. There was a strange comfort in the way the land stretched endlessly before him, but that comfort was tinged with sorrow. He wasn't just leaving a place, but leaving behind what little connection he still had to his family. The silence in the car felt almost unbearable. Mateo finally cleared his throat and said, "Do you remember, Leo? When you were little, we used to take drives like this. Your mama would pack sandwiches, and we'd spend the day exploring the countryside." Leo glanced at him in the rearview mirror, a flicker of a smile crossing his lips. "I remember, Papa. Those were good times." Mateo nodded, the memory softening his voice. "Your mama used to say that the wildflowers out here were prettier than any garden. She loved these drives. She said it made her feel free." Leo didn't respond immediately, but Mateo saw the faint smile remain on his face. For a moment, the tension between them seemed to ease. As the car continued its journey, Mateo's thoughts drifted further into the past. He remembered the day he first brought Leo into his home, a scared but curious little boy who had just lost his own parents. Mateo and Camila had promised to give him all the love they had to offer. "Do you think he'll ever call me Papa?" Mateo had asked Camila one night, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Camila had smiled, her hand resting gently on his arm. "You'll see. One day, he'll realize what kind of father he has." That moment had come sooner than Mateo expected. One evening, after Mateo had helped Leo fix a broken toy, the boy had looked up at him with wide eyes and said, "Gracias, Papa." From that moment on, Mateo never doubted his place in Leo's heart. Now sitting in the back of the car, Mateo felt a pang of regret. Somewhere along the way, he had begun to doubt not Leo's love, but his own worthiness of it. The car slowed as they reached a winding road flanked by tall trees. The sunlight filtered through the branches, casting dappled patterns on the asphalt. Mateo's chest tightened as he realized he didn't recognize the area. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. Leo didn't answer right away. Instead, he smiled faintly and said, "We're almost there." The word sent a shiver down Mateo's spine. Almost there. What did that mean? Was this road leading to a nursing home, far from the life he had once known? Was this Leo's way of fulfilling his request without fully confronting it? Mateo clutched his bag tighter, his knuckles whitening as he tried to steady his breathing. The sound of the gravel crunching beneath the tires as the car turned onto a new path only deepened his anxiety. Finally, the car came to a stop. Mateo hesitated, his heart pounding as Leo stepped out and opened the back door. "Come on, Papa," Leo said gently, holding out a hand to help him out of the car. Mateo's legs felt weak as he stepped onto the ground. He squinted against the sunlight, his eyes scanning the clearing ahead. What he saw made him freeze in place, his breath catching in his throat. Standing proud and pristine, there as a house he knew all too well. It wasn't the charred remains of his home that had haunted his memories for so long. No, this house was restored, gleaming as if it had been plucked straight from the past. The white paint shimmered under the sunlight, the porch railings were sturdy and new, and the windows sparkled with clarity. For a moment, Mateo thought he might be dreaming. His knees buckled, and Leo quickly moved to steady him. "Careful, Papa," Leo said softly, his voice filled with warmth. Mateo's lips trembled as he whispered, "What? What is this?" Leo smiled, his eyes glistening. "Welcome home, Papa." Mateo's legs wobbled as he took a hesitant step forward. His hand brushed against the smooth wood of the porch railing, the scent of fresh pine and varnish filling his senses. The smell was so familiar, so real, that it brought tears to his eyes. He turned to Leo, his voice barely above a whisper. You did this?" Leo nodded, his smile widening. "Come inside, Papa. There's more to see." With trembling hands, Mateo followed his son up the steps and through the front door. His heart raced with a mixture of disbelief, awe, and an emotion he hadn't felt in years. Hope. As Mateo stepped through the door, the familiar scent of freshly polished wood and the faint hint of lavender greeted him. His eyes widened as he took in the scene before him. The interior was a blend of the old and the new, meticulously crafted to recreate the warmth and charm of the home he had lost so many years ago. The polished wooden floors glowed in the sunlight streaming through the sparkling windows. The walls were painted a soft, inviting beige, accented with framed photographs that instantly drew Mateo's attention. His breath hitched as he recognized the faces in the pictures. Himself and Camila on their wedding day, Leo as a boy laughing in the garden, and snapshots of family gatherings long past. His gaze fell to the fireplace mantel, where a single photograph stood in an elegant frame. Camila, her radiant smile lighting up the image, holding a basket of freshly picked flowers. Mateo's knees weakened again, and he reached for the armrest of a chair to steady himself. "Papa, are you okay?" Leo asked, moving to his side. Mateo nodded slowly, his voice caught in his throat. I don't understand. How is this possible?" Leo guided him to the familiar armchair by the fireplace, a piece Mateo recognized immediately. The chair's fabric had been restored to the same soft floral pattern Camila had chosen years ago. Sitting down, Mateo felt as though he had been transported back to another time, another life. "You never planned to take me to a nursing home," Mateo said softly, his voice trembling with realization. Leo knelt in front of him, his eyes shining with emotion. "No, Papa, we never did." Mateo looked around the room, his mind racing. "But this, the house, it's exactly like it was before." "How?" Leo smiled, his hand resting gently on his father's knee. "After the fire, I knew how much this house meant to you, Papa. It wasn't just a place, it was your memories, your connection to Mama, and everything you built together. I couldn't let that be the end of it." He gestured around the room, his voice filled with pride. "We rebuilt it, piece by piece. It wasn't easy. We used the land from San Antonio as the foundation, but it took months of planning. I couldn't tell you. I wanted it to be a surprise." Mateo's eyes filled with tears as he listened. He glanced toward the hallway, where familiar wooden frames lined the wall. "You even saved the photographs?" Leo reached into a nearby drawer and pulled out a thick album, its edges slightly singed but still intact. "Not all of them," he admitted, handing the album to Mateo. "But we were able to save these." Mateo's hands trembled as he opened the album. The first page held a photograph of Camila planting flowers in the garden, her hair tied back with a red scarf. Mateo's fingers traced the edges of the image, his heart swelling with bittersweet emotion. "She loved that garden," he murmured, tears streaming down his face. "She said it was like raising another child." Leo sat back on his heels, his smile soft but proud. "We wanted you to have it back, Papa. Not just the house, but everything it meant to you." At that moment, Clara entered the room, carrying a fresh bouquet of flowers. "And it wasn't just us," she added, placing the bouquet on the table. "The neighbors from San Antonio helped too. Everyone remembered how much you loved this house and wanted to make it right." Mateo looked between Leo and Clara, his chest tightening with emotion. You did all of this for me?" "Of course, Papa," Leo said. "You've always been there for me, for us. You gave me a home when I had no one. This is just a small way to thank you." The emotions swirled in Mateo's chest, too overwhelming to put into words. He reached for Leo's hand, gripping it tightly. "Mijo," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought I had lost everything. I thought you didn't care, that I was a burden to you." "But this, you were never a burden," Leo interrupted, his voice firm but tender. "Not once. Everything we did because we love you, Papa." Mateo couldn't hold back the tears any longer. He pulled Leo into a tight embrace, holding on to him as though letting go would shatter the moment. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for bringing me home." After a few minutes, Mateo's eyes wandered to the window, where the sunlight danced on the freshly tilled earth of the garden. A sudden sound caught his attention, a soft whinny that made his heart leap. "Is that—" Mateo's voice trailed off, his eyes widening in disbelief. Leo grinned and stood, gesturing for Mateo to follow him. "Come and see, Papa." They stepped out onto the porch, the crisp air filled with the faint scent of wildflowers. Mateo's gaze fell on the paddock near the garden, where a familiar figure stood. There, tied to a sturdy post, was Estrella. The old horse's coat gleamed in the sunlight, her mane freshly brushed. She turned her head toward Mateo, her ears flicking as she let out another soft whinny. Mateo's breath caught in his throat. "Estrella," he whispered, tears streaming down his face once more. The horse pawed the ground and nickered as if recognizing her old master. Mateo hurried down the steps, his legs trembling but determined. Reaching the paddock, he wrapped his arms around Estrella's neck, burying his face in her mane. "You're alive," he murmured, his voice breaking. "I thought I lost you too." Clara joined Leo on the porch, watching the reunion with a soft smile. "We found her a few weeks after the fire," Clara explained. "She had wandered into town. Some of the neighbors kept her safe until we could bring her back here." Mateo stroked Estrella's mane, his heart brimming with a joy he hadn't felt in years. The warmth of the horse beneath his hands, the solidity of the house behind him, and the presence of his family all felt like a miracle. He turned back to Leo, his voice filled with gratitude. "You've given me back more than just a home, Mojo. You've given me back my life." As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Mateo stood by the paddock, watching Estrella graze peacefully. The distant hum of crickets filled the air, and for the first time in years, Mateo felt whole again. Leo stepped beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You deserve this, Papa. You've always deserved it." Mateo looked at his son, then back at the house. A smile crept across his face, one that reflected not just happiness, but peace. "Thank you, Mojo," he said softly, "for everything." Mateo stood beside Estrella, his hands stroking the horse's mane with a mixture of disbelief and wonder. The warm scent of hay and sunlight surrounded him, grounding him in the reality of the moment. For so long, he had believed that everything he cherished, his home, his wife, and even Estrella, was gone forever. Yet here she was, her soft whinnies filling the quiet evening air, a living connection to the life he thought he had lost. "She still remembers you," Clara said as she joined him by the paddock, a gentle smile on her face. Mateo turned toward her, his voice trembling with emotion. How could she not? Estrella was always more than just a horse. She was family. She worked beside me every day in the garden, carrying tools, pulling carts, and even keeping Camila company when I was too busy. I didn't think I'd ever see her again. Clara nodded, her hand resting on the wooden fence. It was Leo's idea to search for her after the fire. The neighbors helped, and when we found her, she was safe but a little shaken. It's like she knew we'd bring her back to you. Mateo smiled softly, his fingers brushing Estrella's mane again. It feels like fate, doesn't it? Like all of this was meant to happen. The sun dipped lower in the sky, painting everything in hues of gold and amber. Mateo lingered by Estrella's side, lost in thought. He remembered the long days he'd spent in the garden with her, tilling the earth and planting rows of vegetables. He remembered how Camila would come outside with a glass of lemonade, teasing him for working too hard. I can't believe she's really here, he murmured, his voice barely audible. Leo appeared beside him, his presence quiet and comforting. I couldn't let you lose everything, Papa. Estrella belongs here with you. She's part of this home, just like you are. Mateo turned to look at his son, his eyes shimmering with gratitude. Mijo, you've done so much, more than I ever expected. I thought you didn't have time for me, that you were too busy to care. But now, seeing all of this, I realize I was wrong. Leo's expression softened, his hand resting gently on Mateo's shoulder. You've never been a burden, Papa. Never. If I seemed distant, it was only because I was working to make this happen. I wanted you to have something that mattered, something that felt like home again. As they stood together, a breeze carried the faint scent of wildflowers from the nearby fields. Mateo felt a deep peace settle over him, something he hadn't experienced in years. It was as though the broken pieces of his heart were finally being mended, one by one. I don't deserve all this, Leo, Mateo said, his voice cracking slightly. After everything, the fire, losing Mama, feeling like I was in the way, I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to thank me, Papa, Leo replied firmly. This isn't about deserving anything, it's about family. You raised me and gave me a life I never would have had without you. How could I not do the same for you? Mateo swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. I just wish your Mama could see this. She would have been so proud of you. Leo smiled wistfully. I think she does see it, Papa. I think she's been with us every step of the way. Later that evening after dinner, Mateo returned to the paddock to check on Estrella. The horse nickered softly as he approached, her large dark eyes watching him with familiarity. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small apple, holding it out to her. Estrella eagerly took it, her teeth crunching into the fruit as Mateo chuckled. Just like old times? Estrella, he said, patting her neck. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their light mirrored in the glistening windows of the house behind him. Mateo leaned against the fence, his heart full as he watched Estrella graze peacefully. Back inside, the house was quiet, save for the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Mateo strolled through the familiar rooms, his fingers grazing the smooth surfaces of the furniture and the restored walls. Each detail spoke of love, of effort, of the countless hours Leo and Clara must have spent bringing this dream to life. In the living room, Mateo noticed a small, leather-bound book sitting on the coffee table. He picked it up, curious, and opened the cover. His breath caught when he recognized Camila's handwriting on the first page. This, he whispered, his hands trembling. Leo entered the room just then, a quiet smile on his face. It's Mama's journal, he explained. I found it when we were going through some of the things that survived the fire. I thought you might want it. Mateo sat down in his armchair, his fingers brushing over the delicate pages. The words were like a lifeline, pulling him back into moments he had almost forgotten. Camila had written about their life together, their dreams, their struggles, and the love that had carried them through it all. She wrote this for us, Mateo said, his voice thick with emotion. She wanted us to remember. Leo nodded, sitting beside him. She wanted this house to always feel like home, no matter what. And now it does again. Mateo read late into the night, his heart swelling with every page. Camila's words wrapped around him like a warm embrace, reminding him of the strength they had shared as a family. He felt closer to her than he had in years, her presence a comforting shadow in the room. When he finally closed the journal and set it aside, Mateo leaned back in his chair and let out a deep, contented sigh. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt truly at peace. Outside, Estrella grazed under the starlit sky, and the house, his house, stood squirm and proud against the horizon. The morning light streamed through the windows, casting a golden hue across the room. Mateo sat at the kitchen table, cradling a warm cup of coffee in his hands. The smell of fresh bread wafted through the air, reminding him of mornings long ago when Camila would hum softly as she baked. But today, his mind wasn't lost in memories. It was focused on the present, on everything that had unfolded in the past 24 hours. Leo entered the kitchen, carrying a thick envelope. His expression was thoughtful as he set it down in front of Mateo. There's something I need to explain, Papa, he said, his tone steady but laced with emotion. Mateo raised a brow, his hands tightening around the mug. What is it, Moho? Leo pulled out a chair and sat across from him. Do you remember the papers I asked you to sign a few months ago? You thought it was to sell the land in San Antonio. Mateo nodded slowly, the memory stirring unease in his chest. Yes, I signed them because I thought it would help you and Clara. What about them? A small smile tugged at the corner of Leo's lips. You weren't signing away the land, Papa. Those were permits for construction. We needed your approval to start rebuilding this house. Mateo blinked, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. Construction? You mean? Leo nodded, his voice softening. We used the land as the foundation for this house, It wasn't easy, but I knew it was what we had to do. Mama always said this home was more than just a place to live. It was a part of who we are. I wanted to bring it back for you, for all of us. Mateo stared at his son, the weight of Leo's words settling over him like a warm blanket. You rebuilt it. And you didn't tell me? We wanted it to be a surprise, Leo said, his smile widening. Clara, the neighbors, even the construction crew, everyone chipped in to make it happen. This isn't just our work, Papa. It's the work of a whole community that loves and respects you. Tears welled up in Mateo's eyes as he thought about the effort and care that had gone into every detail of the house. He shook his head, overwhelmed. I thought you didn't want me anymore. I thought I was in the way. Leo reached across the table, his hand covering Mateo's. You've never been in the way, Papa. You raised me and gave me a life I never would have had without you. This house, this effort, it's just a small way to repay you for everything you've done for me. Mateo's throat tightened, and he struggled to find the words. I don't deserve this, Mojo. I doubted you. I thought you were trying to push me away. I let my fears get the better of me. Leo squeezed his hand gently. You deserve more than this, Papa. And I don't blame you for doubting. We weren't as present as we should have been. But we never stopped loving you, not for a second. Mateo leaned back in his chair, the warmth of the coffee mug seeping into his hands. He looked out the window at the garden, where Estrella stood grazing peacefully. The sight filled him with a quiet sense of peace, a feeling he hadn't known in years. You brought back everything I thought I had lost, he said softly. This house, Estrella, even Mama feels closer to me now. Leo smiled, his eyes glistening. We couldn't bring her back, but we wanted to give you something that would remind you of her, something that would make you feel whole again. As they sat together, Clara entered the room, carrying a basket filled with gardening tools. I thought you might want to get started on the garden today, she said with a smile. We cleared out a spot yesterday. It's ready for planting. Mateo's heart swelled at the thought. The garden had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in the rhythm of the earth. You did all this for me? He asked, his voice breaking. Clara set the basket down and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You've always taken care of us, Mateo. It's our turn to take care of you. Later that morning, Mateo stepped into the backyard, his hands gripping the handles of a wheelbarrow filled with tools and seeds. The sight of the freshly tilled soil brought a lump to his throat. It looked just as it had years ago when he and Camila had spent hours planting rows of tomatoes, peppers, and flowers. Leo and Clara worked beside him, helping to lay out the rows and plant the first seeds. For the first time in years, Mateo felt useful, like he was part of something bigger than himself. Each handful of soil he turned, each seed he pressed into the earth was a step toward healing. You know, Mateo said, wiping the sweat from his brow, your mama always said the garden was the heart of the house. She said it's where we put down our roots, literally and figuratively. Leo chuckled, glancing at his father. Then we better make sure it's as good as she'd want it to be. Mateo nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. I think she'd be proud. As the day went on, Mateo found himself laughing with Leo and Clara, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The quiet moments of grief and doubt that had plagued him for so long began to fade, replaced by a deep gratitude for the life he still had. When the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the garden, Mateo stood back and admired their work. Rows of freshly planted seeds stretched across the soil, a promise of new life and new beginnings. Leo stepped beside him, his hand resting on Mateo's shoulder. How does it feel, Papa? He asked quietly. Mateo looked at him, his eyes shining with tears. It feels like home. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Mateo felt a sense of belonging he hadn't known in years. The house wasn't just a building, it was a testament to the love and dedication of his family. And the garden, now full of potential, was a reminder that even after loss, life could grow again. Leo handed him a cup of tea, his voice soft as he said, You've always been the foundation of our family, Papa. Everything we are, everything we've done, it's because of you. Mateo smiled, his heart swelling with love. For the first time in years, he truly believed it. The night was quiet, save for the soft rustling of the trees and the distant hum of crickets. Mateo stood by the fireplace, staring at the photograph of Camila that rested on the mantel. Her radiant smile seemed to hold a silent message, one he had been too blind to see before. You are not alone. In his hand was the journal Leo had given him earlier, the one filled with Camilla's thoughts and dreams. Mateo flipped through the pages slowly, each entry pulling him deeper into a time when life felt fuller and more prosperous. Her handwriting, neat and deliberate, seemed to breathe life into her words. One passage caught his eye. Mateo always worries too much. He doesn't realize how much he gives to everyone around him, how he holds us all together. I hope one day he sees himself the way I see him, strong, loving, and irreplaceable. Mateo's breath caught as he reread the words. Camilla had always seen the best in him, even when he couldn't see it himself. And now, through Leo's actions, those words felt alive again. He closed the journal and set it gently on the coffee table. The house was silent, but it wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of belonging. For the first time in years, Mateo felt at peace with where he was and who he had become. The following day, Leo arrived at the house early. Mateo was already awake, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee in hand. The morning sunlight danced across the garden, where dewdrops clung to the freshly tilled soil. "Good morning, Papa," Leo greeted, stepping onto the porch. Mateo smiled, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. "Morning, Mojo. Sit. The garden looks good, doesn't it?" Leo sat down, his gaze following Mateo's. "It does. You've still got the magic touch." Mateo chuckled softly. "Your mama always said the same thing. She used to tease me and said she could help me grow flowers on a rock if I wanted to." Leo laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "She wasn't wrong. You've always been able to make things grow. Gardens, families, me." The words hung in the air, and Mateo turned to look at his son. "Mijo, I need to say something," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "You don't have to, Papa," Leo interrupted gently. "I do," Mateo insisted. "For weeks I've been sitting in that room, thinking I was a burden to you and Clara. I thought you didn't want me around, that you were too busy for an old man like me." Leo opened his mouth to protest, but Mateo raised a hand to stop him. "Let me finish," he said. "I was wrong. I see that now. You've done so much for me, more than I could ever have imagined. You rebuilt this house, brought back Estrella, and gave me back a piece of my life I thought I'd lost forever." His voice faltered, and he took a moment to steady himself. "I doubted you, Mijo. I doubted your love, and for that I'm sorry." Leo leaned forward, his hand resting firmly on Mateo's shoulder. "Papa, you don't need to apologize. I understand why you felt that way. We weren't there for you the way we should have been, not at first. But you've never been a burden to us. You're the reason I am who I am today. Everything I've done, everything I've built, is because of you." Mateo's chest tightened, his heart swelling with gratitude. "You've given me more than I deserve, Mojo, and I promise I'll never doubt you again." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words lifting between them. The bond that had always been there, unbroken but strained, felt more vital than ever. Later that day, Mateo decided to unpack the last of his belongings. As he opened his suitcase, he found a small box tucked at the bottom. Inside was an envelope, yellowed with age and addressed to Leo. Mateo's hands trembled as he unfolded the letter he had written weeks ago during one of his loneliest nights in Austin. The words on the page were heavy with sorrow and regret. In the letter, Mateo apologized to Leo for being a burden and asked for forgiveness for the trouble he believed he had caused. But now, holding the letter in his hands, Mateo realized how much had changed. He glanced at the photograph of Camilla on the mantel, her smile a gentle reminder of the love that surrounded him. Without hesitation, Mateo tore the letter into small pieces, the sound of the paper ripping feeling like a release. "No more doubts," he said softly to himself. "Leo has shown me that love doesn't count burdens, it only counts blessings." That evening, Mateo joined Leo and Clara for dinner in the garden. The table was set with simple but delicious dishes, and the sound of laughter filled the air as they shared stories and memories. Estrella grazed nearby, her tail swishing contentedly. The scent of wildflowers and freshly turned soil drifted on the breeze, wrapping around them like a warm embrace. At one point, Clara raised her glass in a toast. "To thee, a family," she said, her smile radiant. "And to the strength that keeps us together." Mateo lifted his own glass, his voice strong and clear. "To family, and to the love that makes everything possible." As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Mateo felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He no longer saw himself as a shadow in his family's life, but as an integral part of it, a foundation on which their love and connection had been built. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the house that now stood as a testament to the unbreakable bond between him and his family. For the first time in years, Mateo felt truly at peace. The days that followed felt like a new beginning for Mateo. Each morning, he woke to the sound of birds singing outside his window, the sunlight streaming through the curtains of a home that once existed only in his memories. As he dressed, the scent of fresh pine and varnish reminded him that this wasn't just a dream. It was this reality now. After breakfast, Mateo would walk out to the garden. It had become his sanctuary once again, just as it had been all those years ago. The rows of freshly planted vegetables were a promise of life yet to come, and Mateo took pride in tending to them every day. His hands, though weathered and stiff from age, found a sense of purpose in the soil. One morning, as Mateo watered the tomato plants, Leo joined him in the garden, carrying a small bag of seeds. "Thought you might want these," Leo said, handing him the bag. Mateo peered inside and chuckled softly. "Zinnias. Your mama loved these. She used to plant them along the fence every spring." Leo smiled, crouching beside his father. "I remember. She said they were the happiest flowers." Mateo nodded, his gaze distant for a moment. She was right. They brought a lot of joy to this place. The two worked side by side, planting the seeds in neat rows along the garden's edge. Mateo found himself sharing stories about Camila, how she would spend hours arranging bouquets, how her laughter would ring out whenever Estrella tried to nibble on the flowers. Leo listened intently, his hands moving rhythmically in the soil. For the first time in years, Mateo felt that his stories were indeed heard, that the memories he cherished so profoundly were alive again in the presence of his son. As the weeks passed, the house began to fill with the warmth of family. On weekends, Clara would bring their son to visit, his laughter echoing through the halls as he ran from room to room. Mateo delighted in showing the boy the garden, teaching him how to plant seeds and care for the earth. "Why do we plant flowers, abuelo?" the boy asked one afternoon, his tiny hands cupping a handful of seeds. Mateo smiled, kneeling beside him. "Because flowers remind us that beauty can grow even after the hardest winters. They're a sign of hope." The boy's face lit up with understanding, and Mateo felt a swell of pride. Even Estrella seemed to thrive in her renewed home. Mateo often spent his evenings brushing her coat and talking to her as if she could understand every word. "You've been through a lot, haven't you, Estrella?" he would say, his voice gentle. "But you came back to me. Just like this house, just like everything I thought I lost." The horse would nuzzle his shoulder in response, her large dark eyes filled with a quiet understanding. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Mateo sat on the porch with Leo and Clara. They shared a simple dinner, the sound of crickets and the distant call of a whippoorwill filling the silence between their conversations. Mateo looked out at the garden, where the zinnias had begun to bloom, their vibrant colors standing out against the soft greens of the vegetable rows. The sight filled him with a deep sense of satisfaction. "Do you know what I've learned, Mojo?" Mateo said, breaking the comfortable silence. Leo turned to him, his expression curious. "What's that, Papa?" Mateo smiled, his voice steady and sure. "I've learned that love doesn't fade, even when we think it's gone. It lingers in the things we build, the memories we share, and the people who carry it forward. This house, this garden, even Estrella, they're all proof of that." Leo nodded, his own smile reflecting the depth of his father's words. "And you've taught me that family is the foundation for everything, Papa. You're the reason we were able to do this." As the stars began to appear, Mateo felt a profound sense of contentment. He thought of Camila, of her laughter, and the love they had built together. He thought of the fire that had nearly taken everything from him, and the long, lonely days he had endured afterward. But more than anything, he thought of the unwavering love of his son and daughter-in-law, who had worked tirelessly to bring him home. He reached for Leo's hand and gave it a firm squeeze. "Thank you, Mojo, for everything." Leo shook his head. "No, Papa. Thank you for never giving up on us, even when things felt hopeless. You're the heart of this family." As the night deepened, Mateo stood by the porch railing, gazing up at the starlit sky. He felt Camila's presence in the cool night air, in the soft rustle of the leaves, and in the laughter of his grandson playing nearby. For so long, he had thought he was a burden, a shadow of his former self. But now, he realized the truth. He was a cornerstone, a foundation on which his family's love and strength had been built. The weekends became a time of joy and renewal. Mateo tended the garden with Leo, taught his grandson about the wonders of nature, and cherished the quiet moments spent brushing Estrella. The house, once lost to ashes, now thrives with life, laughter, and love. In those moments, Mateo understood what Camila had always known. Home wasn't just a place. It was the people who filled it with love. As he sat on the porch one last time that evening, listening to the gentle rhythm of the world around him, Mateo allowed himself to let go of the grief and doubt that had weighed him down for so long. He was home. Stories like Mateo's remind us of the deep, unshakable bonds that hold families together, even through life's most challenging moments. Mateo thought he had lost everything, the love of his life, his home, his sense of purpose, but what he discovered was far more profound. His family's dedication showed that love is not just spoken, but demonstrated through actions, sacrifice, and unwavering support. Bookmark: Leo's determination to rebuild his father's home was more than just restoring a house. It was an act of gratitude, a testament to the foundation Mateo had built through years of love and care. The return of Estrella and the restoration of the garden symbolized the revival of hope, showing that even after significant loss, new beginnings are always possible. This story isn't just about Mateo. It's a reflection of all of us. It's a reminder to cherish our loved ones, to see their worth even when they don't, and to act on the love we carry in our hearts. It teaches us that no matter how lost or forgotten someone might feel, a simple act of kindness and understanding can bring them back to a place of belonging and peace. If this story moves you, we want to hear from you. Did it inspire you? Did it remind you of someone in your own life? Let us know in the comments. If you thought the story was good, comment with a 1. If you thought it was terrific, comment with a 2. And don't stop there. Share your own stories of love, resilience, and family. We would love to read them and hear how moments like these have touched your life. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share. These tales are a reminder of the power of love, family, and hope, and there's so much more to come. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And let's keep the conversation going. Get to hit that subscribe button to stay connected with more inspiring tales.